Valkyrie, your life force is running out.
So this is my Dwarven Forge terrain, or some of it. This is a mix of one of their mountain packs, some of their typical sort of dungeon components like these sort of span bridges, and some more of their sort of caverns deep range where they get these specific interesting pieces. So, you know, as an overview, there we go. It's pretty extensive. It's a 3 foot by 4 foot terrain layout, this one, and I've used the actual template boards that they provide, these metal boards which are covered in a kind of neoprene material, and that allows you to sort of lay them out. They're magnetic, many of their pieces, so that one's not, but many of the sections are. Oh, that one's a magnetic piece, so you can see there how a magnet sits underneath, which means that when you sort of put it down on the table on these metal boards, it has a really nice solid fit. I can't remember if these larger ones are also, yeah, these larger ones have magnets too. So just in putting this together and thinking about how you might build out a dungeon encounter in Dungeons and Dragons, I've thought about the layout in terms of how it can be used flexibly and also provide some sort of dynamic areas as well. So there's some water down here, which makes it a little bit trickier with some narrow paths to take. And this is a kind of an icy temple, so it moves to sort of ice over the back here. And I've got a sort of chaos temple situation set up. So it would make a good sort of finale style encounter. But at the same time, with a spanned arch in the middle, I mean, that's a great sort of showdown location too if there was to be a battle. And this is a Games Workshop, I think the Vampire Counts range. And I've got a range of other models here, so that's an old Dungeons and Dragons, I think actually it was a Dungeons and Dragons branded metal miniature that they did a few years ago, about 10 years, no, 20 years ago I think, no, 18 or so years ago definitely. And a couple of others like a wizard there, female wizard from Hassle Free. I think this is a normal elf model from the sort of Dungeons and Dragons ranges now, and I've got a resin female warrior there too. So yeah, so if, in terms of building this layout, back to the topic in terms of building out an encounter, I've tried to give different routes. So it's one of those challenges because quite often in a, you know, old school style of encounter, you've got a narrow corridor and lots of small rooms off it, and a big dungeon to explore. So this is more like one of the sort of layouts that you come into in a computer game where you've got different routes over the board you could take. It would make one nice large encounter and allow for some different tactical ways of working. So definitely if they could see initially some movement over in the distance at the temple, which they knew was a destination, perhaps they had a collection type goal, or some sort of character to have a showdown with over here, then they know they've got different routes to take. And then would you expose it? That's the other question. Perhaps you could layer on some cover for this as well. I've been known to use Lego tiles to give it a sort of cover up view. Well, they're fake Lego tiles anyway, but if I'm playing on these normal sort of flat layouts where I've got a printed mat underneath, which I've just put some acrylic on here, I often cover up the areas of encounter like this, and then I might put coloured bits of Lego on there so I know that's the blue encounter, and I'll have a reference or something somewhere so I know when that flips over I'm going to have certain creatures or encounters in there. It's not so easy on the more detailed Dwarven Forge terrain, but you could still cover up important things. with some Lego plates, and then it just gets very hard if you've got a sort of more interesting location like this. So any kind of elevation, you're turning into something where it's quite hard to disguise it. In which case, if I was running that game, I would definitely go for a sort of open theme style where players can see the layout, they can see routes that they can take, but ultimately they're going to need to discover where the beasts are, discover where the creatures are, and explore where the encounters are. I wouldn't necessarily put all the monsters out on show, although I might want to put a minor henchman or creature somewhere on show as a kind of a hint of what's to come. So there's no harm in doing that as well, and almost guiding them if you bring them on and they get a kind of a view out across the area. If it's light enough or they've got a long enough distance view, I could tease them a bit by putting something small out, like a small goblin or some other kind of creature that presents a minor challenge, or even a bigger threat hidden away. So some of the things I thought of when I was building this out included using this sort of black tile down here as a bottomless style pit. So if there was any combat action over this area, there's a risk of sort of falling into it. I also made sure there's different routes to sort of climb up, but there was still some difficult terrain if they were trying to traverse the area over here, which was icy. So just make it a little bit harder if that was a combat option that was going on over there as part of the encounter expanded that way. And the other thing really is to try and avoid too many bottlenecks, because if it was just only one route from one location to another, or one route through, you can certainly end up with just funneling really into one location. That may be what you like. You may be wanting that in your encounter and set up, well, just one bridge through. From my experience of role-playing and war games, it really does focus a game if there's only one route through. But if that's what you like and you want to know that the battle's going to be on just one bridge, then don't give people as many routes through. Block them up and give them only the one route. But it will mean that the encounter's pretty sure to end up in one blocked location.
Remember, don't shoot food.
So another challenge faced late on in games where player characters either have sort of flying mounts or they are pretty well kitted up in terms of spells is the kind of issues that you get where suddenly they've got flight, which just destroys a lot of ideas. When you're thinking of a dungeon master scene and you think, okay, I'm going to put something up high they can't get, or I'm going to make this one more of a challenge because I've got to climb up somewhere and it's going to take time. And then when you've got a couple of characters that can use flight in one way or another, that sort of breaks it down a bit, and the dynamic of the game can change. In which case, having some grounded locations is good, and potential of using things that can disrupt spells, sort of anti-magic fields. But I try and avoid being too much of an arms race DM where you end up finding a counter or a foil for everything that they can do. So at which point, if someone's able to fly through an encounter from one place to another, no harm in giving them some challenges, that other things that can fly thrown in there, even if they're weak things. That's something I quite like to do, to throw some chaff in, sort of reasonable volume of chaff as well, because if you just go for one single ground-based creature, or just follow the Dungeons and Dragons encounter by the book, and if it doesn't have anything in the air and yet you've got flying creatures or flying characters, you may end up stuck a bit there in terms of not having enough of a challenge, and they're able to then fly to exactly where they need to and then get out of there quick. Again, if you're playing Theatre of the Mind or something and you want to just describe a scene where they can get to their goal very, very quickly, that's certainly a bit of fun to have too, is to sort of give them that feeling of power. You know, they can fly up to the tower highest window, get in, encounter the main scene in that location and skip by the level by level kind of exploration when they reach that sort of power level, or just because you can make them feel a little bit more powerful for a period of time. So yeah, I didn't want to do like a top 10 tips. This is just more of a ramble. And because I bought a new light in my garage to try and make this a little bit more easier to see for recording. So hopefully you've enjoyed just exploring some of the Dwarven Forge items here and just how I've sort of built them up using the bridge in different locations. Also using some of their transparent pieces too. They're very handy to sort of add something to an existing tile and blend between two tiles here, because there's two tiles, a water one and an ice one, and I've used that to sort of blend the route between them. And this is one of the Dwarven Forge main larger box pieces that they do, which gives you some instant elevation. I've obviously now disguised it a little by giving it some edging to sort of blend it into this rocky region a little bit more. But these are fantastic. If you get a couple of these, you've got instant elevation and such a large area to play over as well. Of course, you'll notice that these areas don't have grids. They do actually do transparent grids so that you can lay over these, but I've not gone for that because it's handy to also sometimes just use a tape measure. It's not always a case of wanting to be very specifically locked into the grid system, but no harm in doing that if you do prefer a grid. I think I might have some of that grid. Yeah, just as a quick overview, I think I have some of that grid on this small layout that I put together using some of their sort of grass material. And you can see it's a plastic sheet, and they do some with lines on, but they also do the sort of grid point version where you can just see where the 5-foot steps would be. So you can layer these plastic sheets on top of the larger bits and larger sections like this too. So I could actually drop them into these, have them underneath, and you'd see a grid on here and you can sort of move off. But from a Dwarven Forge layout perspective, what I've tried to do here is add some angles in, so not everything is on the exact squared out setup. So having this bridge down here at an angle and this as well just breaks up that very straight grid system. I think if you're in America, you're obviously a lot more used to grid systems than we are, because your towns and cities are built off them. Not that that would necessarily mean you'd want your layouts to follow that specifically like a road grid system, but it does mean it's quite regimented and structured. And just being able to break it up by putting something at an angle works more interestingly for me. The only thing I'd say is that if you then try to have a grid underneath here, you'd then lose that complete layout. But as a company, I know Dwarven Forge do now try their hardest to break up the exact grid, but still give you the impression of where the 4 sort of locations are on many of their different structured bits and pieces. So even on these, you still get that impression of the different 5-foot locations on there. If you wanted to use that for your movement, gives you a nice idea, sort of, oh, okay, there's 5, 10, 15, 20 as far as the sort of movement along there, without it looking like a total set of paving slabs, basically. So yeah, if you want to see more of me just rambling on about layouts and Dwarven Forge, please comment, and I'll definitely try some more of these to talk about this in a bit more detail. It's my first one. I haven't put a lot of script or thought into this. I've just got a nice new light in the garage to be able to highlight some of this terrain in a nice way, and because of that I kind of rushed out with my camera. So hopefully you've seen something of interest on here, and you can ask a question in the comments and tell me what to do for my next one. What would you like me to talk about in terms of encounters? Would you want to explore more about Dungeons and Dragons? And maybe me even sort of play through how I'd like to see an encounter, or what I'd think an encounter could work like with some monsters and things on there. And any ideas for how an encounter would flow in terms of the scenes and different sort of stages of it. So that's it. Thanks for listening in. Goodbye.